Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on this conversation, I have made it my mission to try to not figure out how high interest payments low-income borrowers should be able to pay, but actually how do we end the payday lender, the check cashing place, the pawnbroker as the portal of entry for this universe of Americans into our financial system. Because while we want them to get access to the ability to have such a loan, I don't know why specifically, because of the nature of the status of what their income is, they have to be, committed to such high interest rates. It seems to me that we should be putting our collective will and effort together to creating portals of entry for them. Having said that, let me congratulate all the nominations. I'm glad to see the Biden administration is finally taking steps to bring greater diversity to the leadership of the Fed, but there's a lot more work to be done. Latinos are this country's largest minority. They make up nearly 20% of the United States population, and yet they have no, underline no, representation in Fed leadership. So my question to all of you, if you're confirmed, will you commit to working with my office to increase Latino representation at all levels of the Federal Reserve? A simple yes or no would work.
Yes.
Yes.
If confirmed, you'll have an important role to play in the selection process for presidents and members of the board of directors at the 12 Federal Reserve banks. Would you commit to working to ensure that diverse candidates are considered for these positions? Ms. Raskin.
Yes, I would, Senator.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So, Mr. Raskin, one of the lessons of the 2007 global financial crisis was that excessive incentive-based compensation plans encourage Wall Street executives to take ever greater risks that ultimately pushed our economy into a devastating recession. When we passed Dodd-Frank, one of the provisions I was able to include is that Congress ultimately passed, instructed the financial regulators, including the Fed, to jointly issue rules to rein in these practices. But in the nearly 12 years since Dodd-Frank was enacted, we've seen the CEO to typical pay ratio balloon to over 351 to 1, as well as a number of scandals, including the London Whale, Wells Fargo fake account scandal, Archegos, and all of which seem to be tied to executive pay incentives. What we haven't seen, however, is a strong incentive-based compensation rule finalized by our regulators. So, if confirmed, will you commit to working with the other financial regulators to develop a strong incentive-based compensation rule?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And that was, you're correct, a requirement in the Dodd-Frank Act. It was a requirement with a deadline, and as far as I know, that deadline has happened, and still there is no rule. There is guidance, but there is no rule. And yes, the answer in short is yes, I would work to implement the law.
Thank you. That's a correct observation. It's well past the time that Congress intended. Also, finally, in that regard, would you make it a priority to finalize the rule by the end of this year if you're confirmed?
Well, if confirmed and I were there, I would certainly look into the issue as to the reason for the delay. I believe there are a number of agencies involved in this, so I would certainly commit to look at this issue.
There are, but we need leadership to move the process forward, so I look forward to you having that leadership. Dr. Jefferson, if confirmed, you'll have some difficult decisions to make in the coming months and years with regard to monetary policy. Inflation is running above desired levels, but if we don't critically examine why that is the case, the Fed's response could be counterproductive, maybe could even harm the recovery. Do you agree that the inflation levels we are currently seeing are mainly being driven by supply chain bottlenecks?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I believe that the inflation that we're experiencing now has multiple components to it. Certainly the pandemic is a very important impact with regards to the supply side. We know that the supply chain effects cause bottlenecks, and for the given level of demand, supply is not able to meet it. And that puts upward pressure on prices.
And finally, how does the supply side nature of the current inflation inform the Fed's response?
Well, Senator, the tools of monetary policy really can not address these developments that occur on the supply side in terms of resolving them. But the mandate given to the Fed by the Congress is very clear, that the Fed has to be mindful of maximum employment, and equally, it has to be aware of price stability and undertaking policy to preserve price stability. So in this moment, Senator, the inflation rate is high relative to the Fed's target, and so the directive is clear. The Fed must take steps to bring inflation back in line with its targets.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some other questions for the record. I haven't had a chance to meet these nominees, but I look forward to your responses.